The hearing will come to order. The subcommittee convenes to review the current posture of Army and Air Force rotorcraft modernization programs and receive testimony on the fiscal year 2017 budget request. I'm pleased to welcome our distinguished panel of witnesses, Lieutenant General Michael E. Williamson, Military Deputy to the Assistant Secretary of the Army, Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology. Major General Michael D. Lundy, Commander, Army Aviation Center of Excellence. Lieutenant General Arnold W. Bunch, Jr., Military Deputy Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force Acquisition. Lieutenant General James M. Mike Holmes, Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategic Plans and Requirements. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us today, and thank you for your service. Our witnesses today will provide testimony on the fiscal and programmatic challenges currently facing Army and Air Force rotorcraft modernization. Because of the fiscal realities and increased missions, the military services have been forced to prioritize near-term readiness at the expense and assumed risk of modernization programs. And rotorcraft modernization has been particularly impacted in the fiscal year 2017. We know the proposed budget request for fiscal year 2017 does not follow the Balanced Budget Agreement, BBA, of 2015. While our near-peer adversaries continue to invest in more modern capabilities and continue to close the technology gap, this budget request cuts force structure and modernization programs from the department's base programs. For example, the Army states in their written statement that, quote, though aviation modernization is a priority, FY17 will reflect over $2 billion in reduced funding when compared to FY16. This has caused the Army to decelerate fleet modernization by procuring fewer UH-60 Blackhawks, AH-64 Apaches, and CH-47 Chinooks in FY17, end quote. I can assure you this committee is working to reverse this dangerous trend in rotorcraft modernization and is working to provide the necessary funding to help mitigate some of these current challenges. For fiscal year 2017, this subcommittee will continue to support the need for fielding most modernized rotorcraft available for both the active and reserve components. Two critical issues that this committee has been concerned about for many years is in regards to accelerating aircraft survivability equipment and degraded visual environment capability onto current rotorcraft programs. We expect to hear today about how the Army and Air Force are addressing these critical needs in a timely manner. We are also interested in hearing the Army's position on the recent recommendations put forward by the National Commission on the Future of the Army relating to the Army's Aviation Restructure Initiative, ARI, and get a better understanding of the costs associated with implementing these recommendations. I'd also like to hear about the Air Force's plans to replace the legacy helicopters that are used by the Air Force in providing security in the ICBM fields in Montana, North Dakota, Wyoming, and several other states. The commander of U.S. STRATCOM has stated, and as has the Secretary of the Air Force, that it is not possible to mitigate the alert requirement without replacing these helicopters, so I look forward to hearing about your plans to address this urgent issue. I would like to now recognize my good friend from California, the ranking member of the subcommittee, Ms. Loretta Sanchez, for any comments that she would like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the generals for being before us to talk about what is incredibly important, the Army and Air Force helicopter programs. And it comes at an important time before the Armed Services Committee because, as you know, we're trying to make decisions about the DOD budget for 2017. And as I said this morning in full committee, it comes with some very hard choices because we cannot choose everything, we cannot do everything. And if we're going to augment what the president's budget or change the president's budget, what came over, then we have to ask ourselves, well, do we need it? How are we going to pay for it? Would be nice to pretend that we can fund everything. Unfortunately, that's not the case. And given that context, the budget requests from Army and Air Force helicopter programs has shown us that choices were made, what a true choice really looks like. But for both services, there simply wasn't enough funding to continue building new helicopters, start new programs for the future, and also upgrade the helicopters that we have in service right now. Both services had to make the tough choices, and the budget request does reflect that. For example, in order to keep AH-64 Apache production on track, the Army was forced to dramatically cut back the Black Hawk production compared to last year. The reduction in Black Hawk helicopters is, for me, a little bit troubling, of course, as you know, because we were looking to the National Guard units, including those in California, to eliminate the old A-model helicopters that they now have. And you know, these helicopters in California, I mean, it hits right home because they're the ones that we use to fight the fires that we've seen in California and other natural disasters. The Army was planning to get rid of all the old Black Hawk helicopters and replace them by 2013. And in last year's bill, we asked for ways in which to accelerate that program. And so the cuts in fiscal year 17 appear to be moving us in the opposite direction. And as concerning as those cuts are, they actually could get worse if the Army is required to keep a large number of Apache helicopters in the National Guard, as was proposed by the National Commission on the Future of the Army. Keeping those Apaches in the Guard may make sense, but it comes at a much higher price tag. The Army also had to cut back on the Chinook and on the Lakota helicopter production, both of which are successful programs that are otherwise doing just fine. But again, Mr. Chairman, when we look at it, real choices were made. On the Air Force side, we also see limited funding leading to some very difficult decisions. The Air Force is trying to keep its combat search and rescue helicopter program on track. But to do that, it had to slow its plan to replace aging UH-1 helicopters that it currently uses in ICBM fields, as you had mentioned earlier. In terms of future investments, it's good to see that both services managed to protect research and development efforts like the future vertical lift programs, the improved turbine engine program, and critical new aircraft defensive equipment investments. You've made some hard choices, so I'm interested in trying to figure out how you came about that, why, and what it really means to us. And with that, I'll yield back, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Without objection, all witnesses' statements will be included in the hearing record, and we only have two opening statements here today, General Williamson, followed by General Bunch. General Williamson.
Chairman Turner, Ranking Member Sanchez, and distinguished members of the Subcommittee on Tactical Air and Land Forces. Thank you for the invitation to discuss the Army's fiscal year 2017 rotorcraft modernization programs, and for the opportunity to appear with our Air Force counterpart, Lieutenant General Bunch. With me today is Major General Mike Lundy, the commander of the Army Aviation Center of Excellence. Mr. Chairman, thank you for making our written statement a part of the record for today's hearing. Mr. Chairman, aviation is the Army's largest portfolio of programs and the one most impacted by our current budget environment. The high level of operational demands, combined with fiscal challenges, contributed to a substantial reduction in Army aviation funding. As you mentioned in your opening statement, a $2 billion reduction from FY16 to FY17, and an additional $531 million reduction as a result of the FY15 Bipartisan Budget Act. The immediate result is the procurement of fewer Blackhawks, Apaches, and Chinooks. The Army presented the Aviation Restructure Initiative, also known as ARI, as part of our FY15 budget plan. By reinvesting the savings and the cost avoidance garnered by ARI, Army Aviation was able to continue to field its most modernized aircraft while developing and fielding the right disruptive technologies to improve mobility, lethality, survivability, and mission command. The Army is currently reviewing and assessing the recently released report from the National Commission on the Future of the Army, which contains a number of recommendations in addition to what we've done on ARI, for which resourcing and modernization may need to be adjusted. Still, we are moving forward with our rotorcraft modernization effort, including identifying and addressing known capability gaps, but at a much slower pace. The FY17 funding request breaks down as follows. In science and technology, the Army supports several critical efforts to enable the next generation of rotary wing capability, including the Advanced Threat Detection System, Degraded Visual Environment Mitigation, and Joint Multi-Role Technology Demonstrator, which will inform affordable requirements and reduce the risk associated with the Future Vertical Lift program. With regard to new systems, the fixed-wing utility aircraft, a replacement for the C-12 and the C-26 platforms, is projected to be selected and begin fielding in FY18. In the area of modernization, we are focused on improving the Apache, Black Hawk, and Chinook helicopter fleets, as well as saving money for the American taxpayer by pursuing a multi-year contract in FY17 for the Apache. We will award the 9th multi-year contract for Black Hawk and complete the second 5-year multi-year contract for Chinook in FY17. In addition, we are continuing to modernize our unmanned aircraft systems fleet comprised of small, the Raven and the Puma, medium, the Shadow, and the large, the Gray Eagle components. In the area of reset and sustain, we are focused on returning Army equipment to the required level of combat capability so that we will be prepared for the next fight or the next contingency. We're also divesting the aging TH-67 training helicopters, as well as the OH-58 Alpha and Charlie Kiowa, and the Kiowa Warriors. And we're also doing everything possible to reduce the number of UH-60 Alpha Black Hawks in our fleet. With regard to other key investments in FY17 include the improved turbine engine program for Apache and Black Hawk to meet worldwide operational requirements for high altitude and hot conditions. The Joint Air-to-Ground Missile, the next generation of aviation launched missiles, and in the area of aircraft survivability equipment, acceleration of the Common Infrared Countermeasure System. Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of this subcommittee, we are grateful for your strong and steadfast support for America's soldiers, for our soldier aviators, as well as our Army civilians and their families. This concludes my opening remarks, Mr. Chairman, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General Bunch.
Thank you, Chairman Turner, Ranking Member Sanchez, and the other distinguished members for the opportunity to address the subcommittee. We greatly appreciate the work you do and the support you provide our airmen and their families. It is a privilege to be here, and General Holmes and I look forward to answering your questions. General Holmes and I prepared a joint written statement, and we've submitted that for the record. I will not go through that statement and read it here. I'll just make a few opening remarks for both of us, and then we'll be ready to answer your questions. We're happy to be here with the Army, as our collaboration on science and technology efforts, development, and procurements is critical. They are great teammates, and we must continue that teamwork to be successful. We are here to discuss the FY17 budget that we submitted and some of the tough choices we made as we finalize that budget. Air Force rotary wing assets are critical to the Air Force's ability to accomplish our mission and provide worldwide support to combatant commanders. Our rotary wing fleet has been and continues to be heavily engaged. They have conducted operations across the spectrum, and we are committed to modernizing and recapitalizing our fleet as we balance readiness and modernization in this budget environment. Although fiscal constraints may have required us to reassess the timing of some rotary wing modernization efforts, the FY17 PB reflects the Air Force's commitment to sustaining, modernizing, and recapitalizing our rotorcraft fleet. Our efforts are focused on modernizing and/or recapitalizing to address our most critical needs. The limited resources available since the Budget Control Act of 2011 have hampered our ability to balance readiness, capability, and capacity. And while we're grateful for the additional resources the Bipartisan Budget Act provides, we need your support in the form of stable and predictable budgets for the future. Your help in this area will be greatly appreciated. We look forward to working closely with the committee to ensure the Air Force retains the ability to deliver rotorcraft air power for America when and where needed. Again, we thank you for this opportunity to testify before the subcommittee, and we look forward to answering your questions, sir.
Thank you. General Williamson and General Bunch, aircraft, survivability, equipment, and degraded visual environmental technology, of course, are two areas of concern, as I stated in my opening statement. General Williamson, you spoke of this issue also. We've held several classified threat briefings and understand there is a sense of urgency for improving and fielding this technology on current platforms, and we certainly are aware of the amounts for each that are in the budget requests. But if you would, to the extent that you can in an unclassified environment, please explain to the subcommittee your current acquisition strategies for ASE and DVE technology, and what can we do to help accelerate them? Starting with General Williamson, then General Bunch.
Sir, thank you for the question. I'd also like to start by thanking you and this committee for your not only focus, but your support of funding in FY15 and FY16 with your understanding of the criticality and the importance of this issue. So my immediate response is to tell you that we've taken a two-tier approach to how we approach this. So the first is we have existing programs of record, and I'll talk a little bit about those, but there's also this understanding that there are immediate needs that have to be addressed. And it starts with the threat. So, sir, as you and I have talked about in the past, so the threat today, our potential enemies, have more and more access to technologies. And so the threat comes on a number of vectors, whether it's man-pads that have advanced in technology, whether it's a cyber threat, or whether it's things like position location. We have to address all of those when you look at aircraft survivability. And so, as you know, we have current programs that look at common infrared countermeasures, advanced radar detection, and laser detection programs. But those programs we've invested in. It will give us a modular solution as we look at our entire aircraft fleet. But we also have to deal with the immediate threat. And so we have worked with our joint partners to identify immediate solutions so that we can give to deploying aircraft so that they can have a countermeasure against the threat. I'd like to also offer that General Lundy might have a couple of thoughts.
No, sir, and I want to reiterate, my thanks for the committee's support, because this is a clear and present threat today, and it's also, there's a long-term issue that we have here. And so as we look at, our current strategy, I think we're on the right path. We have a joint solution that the Congress has helped fund and accelerate, and we're moving that as fast as technology will allow us to put it on capabilities that are currently deployed today. We've also been able to accelerate our current program of record and bring it forward sooner, about 3 years, which is great. And then we have a huge S&T effort that is focused on the next generation of survivability capabilities, and that's really where us and the Air Force, frankly, the Navy and the Marines are working very closely together with our SOCOM partners on a number of S&T efforts that will help us build capabilities for the future that will get ahead of this threat as opposed to reactionary. And I think that's the key. We can't do what we did in Iraq. I mean, there was not a lot of threat there, but we waited until the threat appeared before we reacted to it. We need to be ahead of this. And I think that's my key concern as the aviation branch chief is how do we get ahead of the threat? And that's going to take consistent S&T work, consistent funding, and your committee and the Congress have been very helpful with being able to do that and give us a stable way ahead.
Mr. Munch?
Sir, thank you for the question. As you know, first off, we are great partners with the Army, and there's no way we can do this without the S&T efforts. We think that's critical for how we go forward in the future, and that investment, we all share the benefits of that, and we look forward to continuing that partnership. On the aircraft that are in the field, we do have systems already to counter many of the threats that we regularly update on mods and put software and new hardware in to keep it. But the threat has evolved and it has changed. We are taking steps to change what we have on the CV-22 with a limited number right now, and we're going to see how that performs. And we're also doing that on the HH-60. On the what we're focused on are countermeasures dispensing capabilities and active infrared countermeasure systems in response to things that I will not go into a whole lot more detail. We have active programs in both of those. We're going to field on limited numbers of those platforms, and then we'll look to field those on the remainder of the platforms in the future.
So, sir, I just want to highlight another point, and that goes back to something that General Lundy said about the ability to get ahead of the threat. So you and I had a conversation about cyber as an example. And so what concerns me is people who think about it being a point solution. This is something that as the enemy learns, they will adapt. And so it's really important for us to have programs that not only deal with the current threat, but are also projecting out. And I think that's critical for us as we move forward.
Thank you for that response, General Williamson and General Lundy. As I mentioned in my opening statement, I'd like you to comment on the status of the Army's Aviation Restructure Initiative, or ARI, and hear your views on the recommendation put forward by the National Commission on the Future of the Army regarding ARI. In addition to this, I'd like to get a better understanding of the unfunded requirements associated with ARI and the Commission's recommendation. Given that we are operating under constrained budgets and that Army Aviation has already been reduced in the President's budget request, if the Army were to adopt the Commission's recommendations, what would be your most pressing requirements in fiscal year 2017? And what are your must-haves?
Sir, as you well know, the report from the National Commission came with over 60 recommendations without resources. So certainly many of those recommendations, as the chief has testified to, are absolutely, they're great ideas, but the resources are the challenge we have to look at. And currently, they're being assessed by the Chief of Staff of the Army, Secretary of the Army on the decisions they're going to make as we go forward. If we were to look at the specific aviation recommendations that are in there to retain an 11th Cab in Korea, as well as the 4 AH-64 battalions, our assessment right now is that's about a $2.4 billion bill that would come back into the Army. It would require, a Department of Defense solution or additional funding from Congress. With that $2.4 billion, there are lots of options on how we would go about doing that, but certainly if it came back into the aviation portfolio, it would have a huge impact, which is one of the reasons why really, we did ARI. So, and as I testified last year on ARI, if we had the resources, we wouldn't be doing ARI. So again, we're kind of back at square one in some respects. But I know the Army's going to take a serious look at that. I know the chief has been very actively involved in that, and we'll see. He'll make some decisions here shortly, and then we'll make a determination on whether we resource that internally or not. If we were to execute, there would be some immediate demands, obviously, for long lead purchases for AH-64s, as well as training aircraft for the training base. If we were to add the 11th Cab and the 4 AH-64 battalions, that would increase our demand in the training base, so we'd need more LUH, and we'd also have to add more AH-64s to the inventory. That would be probably the two most pressing needs that I would see if we were to do those.
And my last question, then, I'd like General Bunch and Holmes, if you would, to respond to the issue concerning STRATCOM and Secretary James' concern that we might not meet the alert requirement about the replacing legacy rotorcraft. Is it correct that aside from the fact that we're dealing with the security of nuclear weapons in the United States, we're also talking about the expense of mitigations, including mitigations in place to meet the convoy escort mission, including additional defenders, as well as a potential request for forces to provide Army National Guard Blackhawks at all ICBM wings? How much does all this cost? Would the Air Force expect new helicopters? What would we be able to save? What are your thoughts on that topic?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So over the last couple of years, as we've done a review of our entire nuclear enterprise, one of the areas we looked at is this mission that supports the security of nuclear weapons on the missile fields. As you pointed out in your opening statement, sir, we've been doing it with a legacy helicopter, the UH-1, for several years, and our update program has been delayed by the budget turmoil with the Budget Control Act and the decrease in buying power that happened there. In the short term, we have taken some mitigation steps, and General Robin Rand, our 4-star commander of Air Force Global Strike Command, has been personally involved in doing some things to support really both our ability to meet both of those missions better on the missile field, both the convoy escort and then the response mission. The mitigations include things like having forward area refueling points that give you more time on station, that allow you to go for a further range and stay out there more, and some other things that I won't go into for security reasons. We're looking at the full range of mitigations to address that until we can field a new helicopter, and we recognize Admiral Haney's view that it's critical that we move forward now. We agree. One of the things that the BBA was able to do for us was to give us a little bit of that buying power back that we could apply to a new helicopter program, and we have the money laid out in this fight-up to be able to do that. And then to accomplish it, General Bunch and our AQ guys are working on a strategy for what's the fastest, best way to make sure we get the right helicopter out there into the missile fields in the shortest timeline that we can.
So, sir, I think it's important to start off with the UH-1N is just one part of a multi-layered defense of our nuclear resources, and our nuclear deterrent force remains safe, secure, effective, and ready if needed. We have taken steps, as General Holmes relayed, to mitigate the things, but there are still areas that we can't address the full requirement. The Secretary of the Air Force has directed us to lean forward and consider more aggressive steps to see how we can go faster. We've requested the requirements, notes, and urgencies from Admiral Haney and others. Those notes are those memos, I shouldn't say notes, are going to come in with the urgency of that requirement, and we're going to weigh that out to see if we have enough information there to be able to do an Economy Act determination and findings and make that determination to go forward. We should be making that decision within the next month to start those actions to see if we want to go forward and do that in a more timely manner. And the other piece we have to remember in this is not just getting iron on the ramp, it's everything else that goes with it that we're trying to focus on as well. So we are leaning forward. We think we'll have an answer within the next month or so on whether we're going to go that direction.
Just to underscore, we have no margin of error here, so we look forward to your recommendations and success. Congresswoman Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to the question that you, or the subject matter that we're talking about here, because the budget request shows a clear path to finally getting at the requirement with a competition that would pick a winner in fiscal year 2018 and start delivering the helicopters in 2020. Am I correct? That's the way I read it, at least when I took a look.
Ma'am, that's correct, and when we would have the competition resolved, who the winner of that may determine exactly when those would get to the field. That's all part of the acquisition strategy we're developing at this time, ma'am.
Okay. So I know that the Air Force has been pressured by some members of Congress to skip the competition and to give it as a sole source contract to one company. So I understand that could speed up the program a bit, but it doesn't appear to meet any of the normal tests for a non-competitive contract award. In this case, it seems to me like that contract could be close to about $1 billion of work. So my questions are, how many potential competitors does the Air Force think it might get if this was done on a competitive program? And as far as the requirement goes, has the Joint Staff approved this as urgent need? And how do you define that urgent need? Is it something like what we saw for our troops who were in Afghanistan and Iraq? And if the Air Force does go to a sole source contract, what would be the justification, and how big a sole source contract are we talking about?
Okay, ma'am. Let me step through those, and if I miss one, I'll let you
Okay.
re-attack me on the ones that I may have missed as you went through that.
Just trying to figure out
No,
how we
yes,
make
ma'am.
$1 billion
No, I understand.
competitive.
So first off, we've not made a determination that we're going to go this way. We still have to get the requirement documents in to outline to us the urgency before we would make that decision. That decision has not been made. That's something we'll do over the next few weeks to a month. The number that we're talking about to try to do this would be focused solely on the helicopters that would be needed to support the nuclear mission. And right now that number is 41. That number is being reviewed by General Holmes and his team, but right now that number is 41 that we would look to do that Economy Act DNF for if we determine the urgency is there.
41
helicopters. We would not do it for the remainder of the fleet. It would only be focused on those, ma'am, that supported the nuclear
Give me a ballpark of
mission.
41 helicopters. How big a wallet do I have to go to shop for 41 helicopters?
Yeah, it'd be in the $800, $900 million range, ma'am. Right now, as we did our market research, ma'am, to set this up for a competition, we think there are about 5 folks who have expressed interest as we did our market research and we get ready to set up the competition as we build our acquisition strategy. And so that's part of the determination we're weighing out is how urgent is the requirement, what is that requirement, and is there a need, is the urgency of the requirement, does it merit us using the Economy Act DNF and delaying or wait for the competition? That's the decision we have to make.
Okay. So you're saying that there's a possibility I would have to go to people and say, sure, we did a sole source contract for $900 million.
That's what we're going to look at, ma'am.
Okay. Well, I hope you look at it carefully and figure out a way to make a competitive process of it rather than just handing out contracts like that.
Yes, ma'am.
Let's go back to, and I hate to be provincial, but I'm going to go back to my California helicopters for a moment, Mr. Chairman. Having enough Black Hawk helicopters for the National Guard, I think, is crucial. So how would the loss of 36 new helicopters over 2 years affect the Army's plans to upgrade all the National Guard existing helicopters by 2023, General?
So ma'am, I'll start from a programmatic impact, and then operationally, I'll ask General Lundy to step in. So as you know, as you well know, we only produce n number of helicopters a year. So the loss of 36 and having to add that back in programmatically would be significant. I'll talk
What does that mean, programmatically? I hope, Major General, you're going to...
Yes, ma'am. So as we look at
Amplify.
California, and then I'll talk about
I don't want to be so provincial. California is a big state, however, I will say that. And we need those helicopters because that's one of the ways we cover some of the ground we have.
So, and we'll talk about kind of the total aviation force, so what the impacts are. With respect to California, so we have one A model of Black Hawk left in California to modernize, and it's going to get modernized in June. So, we'll have California fully modernized with L models by June. We have about 550 A model Black Hawks across the National Guard and the active components. It's about an even split between the two. We're still on track right now to finish modernizing the Guard in 23, and we'll modernize the active component in 25. So we're a couple of years behind on finishing up all the active component Black Hawks. If we were to go in and enact some of the National Commission recommendations, that's really what's going to impact our ability to finish modernization as fast as we think we can. And that potentially could, some of the options might be that we slip some of that, modernizing both the Guard and the active component in Black Hawks to the right 2 or 3 years. So that's some of the decisions we're going to have to make as the Chief and the Secretary of the Army consider the National Commission recommendations. But right now, we're still on track. Even though we're buying less Mike model Black Hawks this year, we're still on track with the Victor model program, which is going to be the recapping of L models into a new fully integrated glass cockpit. That's going to be our newest Black Hawk. So I'm comfortable right now that we're still on track for 23 for the Guard and 25 to 26 for the active component.
So going back to that ARI, if you were saying that it was about a $2.4 billion request or suggestion or whatever we want to call it at this point, how much of that would be in 2017 and for what programs?
Well, none of it's in 2017 because the decision has not been made for the National Commission recommendation. I know we have asked for, to set conditions for that if we make that decision. I know we've asked for some additional advanced procurement on, on AH-64s that would help us set the conditions for that decision. But we're not using any, we have not adjusted our budget at all this year in 17 to accommodate for the National Commission recommendations.
So if we adjusted the Army and let's say you took the AVI suggestion and it started to be covered in fiscal year 18 and beyond, what gets cut? I mean, aside from the 2 or 3 year push to that you talked about with respect to the Black Hawk, what do we have to give up that we think right now we're going to get?
Well, there are a lot of options, and we're going to present all those options to the Chief. I mean, if it's internal to the aviation portfolio, it will certainly be a further slowing down of modernization. So, pushing modernization efforts farther to the right, depending upon where he wanted to take risk at and which aircraft and which capabilities would dictate that. Or if it became a total Army solution or a solution at the department level, or if we received additional funding. So it's kind of hard to say what exactly would be impacted. But if it comes back into the portfolio, $2.4 billion is a huge hit in the portfolio over the FIDAP. So it would be very significant.
Well, I think I'm going to have a lot more questions on that for the record. I don't want to take up everybody's time, but this is a big issue here. So thank you very much.
Dr. Winstrup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Lundy, can you tell me a little bit about using guided rockets in combat and the effectiveness between unguided and guided and implementation of either?
Yes, sir. The guided rockets have recently really proven to be very effective, and we are modifying our lethality strategy to bring more guided rocket capability in. The guided rocket is less expensive than some of our missiles, and for certain targets, they're appropriate. So, we get a better cost curve, I guess you would say, and it allows us to service different kinds of targets. So, guided rockets are definitely a part of our strategy. We're reducing the amount of unguided rockets that we previously shot for mostly suppression because of the lethality of improvements in the guided rocket field. So we certainly see a path ahead. We have a current program of record. It's a Navy program of record that we're using called APKWS. And we have an S&T effort right now with our S&T team, AMBERDEC, that is the modular missile system. It's a modular can be a guided rocket, can be a missile, can be air-to-air. It's a modular capability, or it can be a drop glide that we can drop off of unmanned systems. That's our future program of record that we're going to transition to. It's got good, stable funding right now, so I'm confident we'll continue down that path. But that's currently how we're using guided rockets in our portfolio.
In our current engagements, say in Iraq and Afghanistan, the rules of engagement come into play as far as which one you can use?
Guided rockets are definitely what we want to use. Precision capabilities when we have tight rules of engagement. You have potential for collateral damage. And a guided rocket has less collateral damage potentially than some of our missiles, some of our larger weapons, so they've got less blast. And they are more accurate. So those are certainly the kind of munitions that we want to use in and around urban areas or areas where we're concerned about collateral damage. So yes, sir.
All right. Thank you, General. I yield back.
Thanks, sir.
Mr. Vesey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask you about the divesting of the Kiowa Warriors, particularly to General Williamson or General Lundy. Do you feel that the Army will be able to fulfill some of the missions that may be foreseeable in the future, like, for instance, trying to prevent the spread of terrorism in sub-Saharan Africa by divesting of a helicopter that's very proven when it comes to reconnaissance and scouting in a terrain where you will need it to do just that, and it can probably perform that capability, better than the helicopter that we're keeping. Can you kind of just touch on that a little bit?
Well, sir, I would tell you we've done some pretty extensive studies. I'm a Kiowa Warrior aviator. Been flying them my entire life. I've flown every model and version of them, and unfortunately, as a branch chief, I'm the one that's taken them out of the inventory. It is a great aircraft. It has tremendous capabilities and has proven itself in combat. I've got lots of combat time in 58s. I've also got time in Apaches, and I've seen what Apaches can do with unmanned systems. Currently, right now, the AH-64 can meet a broader range of missions, especially teamed with unmanned systems, but we still have a requirement for a scout, and we're pursuing a scout requirement as we move forward. Again, it's much like all of the other tough decisions that we have to make. We have a budget, and I certainly would like to be buying a scout tomorrow, but we're looking at a strategy on how we can proceed forward within the budget constraints that we have. But there's definitely a viable mission there. The requirement is still viable, but we have a viable solution to bridge that gap until we can get to, and we see it probably coming with future vertical lift. That family of systems is when we'll see a scout aircraft come back into the inventory. Industry is doing a lot of work right now. There's a lot of IRAD that we're very interested in, so it may be able to come earlier if there's something that we can procure commercially off the shelf and the budget suggests a little bit. So there's a lot of options that we're exploring, but the mission's still viable, the requirement's still viable.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Ms. Walorski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thanks for being here. General Williamson, good to see you again. I just had General Lundy, I had a follow-up question to Representative Winstrup on the issue of guided rockets, non-guided rockets. My follow-up question quickly was, can you just comment on how the Army plans to implement enhanced warhead technology that's capable of neutralizing a wider spectrum of targets, such as light and up-armored vehicles, bunkers, and structures?
Yes, ma'am. So
Then I have another question.
Yes, ma'am. We have a couple of initiatives going on right now. As a matter of fact, we were just doing some test shots this week where we're developing some particular fusing capabilities that allow for delayed reaction so they perform better against bunkers. We've also tested some of the other commercial systems that are out there. And as a part of our lethality strategy, we're not only looking to improve the warheads that we have on our rockets, but we're also looking at improving our missile performance, because there are some advanced targets that are out there now and some of our great power competitors that we've got to be able to deal with in the future. So certainly looking at improved warheads is a part of our lethality strategy. And the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army 2 weeks ago approved our way ahead on that. So we do have a pretty solid path as we're moving forward. Yes, ma'am.
Thanks. I appreciate it. I just, General Lundy, have another follow-up question. Chairman Turner alluded to this, that regarding the ever-present friction of modernizing the existing inventory while preparing for the future. Not denying that our aircraft and soldiers who fly and maintain them have done exceptionally well over the past 15 years of nearly constant deployments. But we have to continue to look into the future. So I'm concerned that this year's budget forces Army Aviation to the bill payer for too many of other programs and does not adequately prioritize future Army Aviation programs. Where are we assuming the most risk in terms of modernizing our fleet of Army Aviation?
Yes, ma'am. I think as the chief has looked at readiness as being the #1 priority, and I absolutely agree with that, because readiness for the aviation force is not just buying platforms. It really is to make sure that our air crews are trained and ready to go out there and fight. And we have, for the last 12 to 14 years, we've been fighting a different kind of fight than we potentially are going to fight in the future. And it's been very team-centric for us. And as we move into potentially facing more advanced threats that are out there at the higher end of combat, we've got to be able to fight collectively at the company, troop, battalion, squadron, brigade level. This is not something we've been doing for 14 or 15 years. So as we look at taking some of this risk, I think it was very evident why we needed to do it, is to make sure the thing that's most important, the combat power that we have, and we equip soldiers, and those soldiers have to be able to fight. They're the weapon system. So I think the trades that we've had to make are important trades to get after training and leader development while still maintaining very important modernization capabilities. With respect to that, where I think we have the most risk, again, is just the pace that we're modernizing. And I mean, that's always our great challenge. Is aviation is very expensive. And I mean, we're the most expensive part of the aviation, the Army's portfolio. So as we look at, we can only really afford to field 2 battalions of AH-64Es a year, a couple of battalions of UH-60s. So that brings capability very slowly into the force. So when you look across our 23 brigades, across the total aviation force, only 2 of them are fully modernized with all of their battalions, all of their equipment, and we're slowly modernizing each one of those. And they're all in various states. We have some that are modernized on Apaches, but not Blackhawks. So it's the pace, I think, is where, we're taking the most risk. But again, I think we have to focus very heavily on the readiness piece, and I think it's important for us to take that risk to make sure that our crews can fly and fight first and foremost. So
I appreciate it.
yes, ma'am.
So ma'am, I'd just like to add to that,
Sure.
the pace. So this goes back to this notion of the agility that the chief looks for. So when you take that pace, and if you use the example that General Lundy just used, is if you're only doing 2 to 3 units a year and you have 23, it becomes simple math. It will take me 10 years before I have everyone at the same capability. And so now you're not only forced to talk about what unit I send, but also understand what capability they have against the threat for that region or that environment. And so pace becomes very important. And we're having the discussion focused on aviation today, but we're making those kinds of choices within all of our portfolios, and we have stretched out modernization. And so as we are incorporating what was the technology of the day at that year, I now have to figure out how to introduce the next technology or deal with the next threat. And so every time we expand this, we make it complicated. And then it also adds the factor associated with interoperability. And so we have to make sure that we're always interoperable interoperable backwards because it's taking me so long to field those systems.
I appreciate it. Thank you, gentlemen, and I yield back. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Graham.
Mind. Don't worry, I can think on my feet. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Thank you, gentlemen. Have we talked about the future vertical lift program in our discussion here? If y'all would discuss where we are with that right now, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. I mean, Future Vertical Lift is a joint program. The Army has the lead for the joint force, but I would tell you that we're working very closely with all of our joint partners. We're going to a milestone decision, or an MDD, this year. So it is on track. We have the Joint Multi-Role Tech Demonstrator, which is the S&T effort that supports it, and it's going to start flying in 17, and there's 2 competitors that are flying those vehicles. That's going to help inform our requirements. So the program is on track. We're looking really from a timing perspective, we'll start seeing kind of low-rate production on the aircraft, the first capability set that we bring in the late 20s, early 30s. And we'll see really going to full operational capability in the early 30s. That's when we'll see the first units fielded.
Is that jointly with the Air Force? Are y'all pursuing that as well?
We're teamed with them, ma'am, and we're watching and we're collaborating.
Okay. And this is to allow this one hovercraft to perform multiple responsibilities. What is the objective of the FVL?
Well, really, when you look at Future Vertical Lift, it's going to give us better speed, significantly better speed, significantly better range, significantly better maneuverability in the objective area, which improves survivability, improves our operational reach, strategic reach, ability to self-deploy. So those are the capabilities that it's going to bring. But there will not just be one aircraft type. There are 5 different capability sets that we look at for the different missions. We have a light variant, which will do things like scouting and some of the special operations missions. We have a lower end medium variant, which the Navy is very interested in. It's going to do anti-submarine work, things like that. The Marine Corps and us are very interested in kind of the middle assault variant, which will be a multi-role aircraft that can do things the Marines want to do and things we will want to do. And then there's some heavier variants out there that will replace our cargo aircraft. So there's a number of variants, but really the intent is to go into a family of vehicles that have a common architecture, they have common cockpits, things like that. They may not look exactly the same behind the cockpit, but there'll be a lot of commonality to reduce costs. And also reduce training costs. But that's kind of the broad overview of the program.
So sort of like the F-35 approach, one sort of base aircraft and then make it different for each of the services?
It'll be somewhat different from the F-35 approach. There'll be some very different variants because of just the size differentials. Now, inside those different capability sets, there will be some multi-roles. So like capability set 3, which is what the Army's calling the assault variant, and what the Marine Corps is looking at is their assault and attack variant. That'll be a common airframe, will look the same, but it's going to have different mission equipment package on it. But then when you go down on the lower end, the smaller aircraft, what SOCOM ends up needing may be different than our Scout variant. We're still looking through those, and we'll see what industry is able to produce and what the technology shows us. But we're going to get as much commonality as we can, but we're also not going to sub-optimize an aircraft to try to do a bunch of missions and end up with, some missions not done very well and other missions done very well. So we're looking very closely at that and doing commonality in other areas that'll get us the savings.
General Williamson, did you have anything else?
Ma'am, I just want to make sure that we're clear in terms of, so at the component level, you might see things like a common engine across a couple of the different variants. So it's not about making the same platform. It's about looking for where are there areas that we can share across the joint force. Some of that could be some of the avionics. Some of it is in taking advantage of technologies and using those on each of the platforms. But it is not about building one single platform.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate y'all's answers as always. Thank you so much. I yield back any time I might have left. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And for the last question series, Mr. Gibson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the panelists. Thank you for your leadership, your service, and the sacrifices you've rendered and your families. So I'm late coming here, so these questions have already been asked. I apologize, but I do have two. The first has to do with the Commission's recommendation for the 4 Apache battalions. I'm interested to know the perspective of the Army on that recommendation, and also how do we balance that with, of course, the need for the modernization of the UH-60, both active and reserve component. So that's really the first question on the Commission, the Apaches and UH-60s. And the second one, maybe a little bit out of your current set of responsibilities, but in your best military judgment, I'm interested as professional aviators, how do you perceive the European Reassurance Initiative from the vantage point of aviation? What concerns, challenges, and anything you would recommend for us to know about that? I think it's a very important initiative, and I just want to make sure that we're taking that in consideration, and if the Air Force wants to take a shot at that one too, that would be great. We'll start with the Army.
Well, sir, good to see you again. I did talk earlier about the NICFA recommendations and where we're at on the AH-64s. You know, as I talked last year with respect to ARI, you know, if we had the right funding, I would want to have kept all that force structure. I think the chief is looking at that. The Secretary of the Army are looking right now. We're providing recommendations and analysis for them, and I think they're going to make some decisions on where the Army is going to go with respect to the National Commission in the upcoming months. If decisions are made, I mean, right now the assessment is about $2.4 billion just for the decision to keep the 11th Cab and the 4 18-ship AH-64 battalions in the National Guard. So that's the bill that we're facing out there. Then there will be a part of the recommendations that we make on how we pay that bill. Whether if it comes out of the aviation portfolio, it's going to have significant impacts, as I discussed last year, and why we had to go to ARI. You know, obviously, if it goes up to the Army level, it's going to have impacts on other Army programs. We're already scrambling right now for money. So there will be a significant bill with it and a significant impact somewhere.
Can I just get a clarification? The 2.4B, is that over 10 years, or what is that?
It really is. It depends on how we approach it. It's really going to be over kind of the FIDEP is about the way it's going to work out. And that will put the appropriate amount of AH-64s that we need. It'll be able to recap those 64s because we're going to have to add to the top line of AH-64 or add to the acquisition objective. It will also put some training aircraft back into Fort Rucker that we'll need because we will have more units to train, so I've got to increase the training base. And that's really only on the equipping side of the house. There's also an OMA bill that's about, we think, probably a little bit less than $200 million a year, I think is what the latest number is. So, but that really will be over about a 5 to 6 year period. But again, it could be spread out as well, but depending upon how we approach the strategy. With respect to the European initiative. I was over in Europe in January looking at what Army Aviation is doing there. I would tell you a lot of challenges in the theater. Currently, Army Aviation, we've got a battalion task forces over there on rotational. They have a company that's currently in Romania. They've got one up in Latvia. There's 600 miles difference between where their company is and where their battalion headquarters is, so it presents some real challenges. It's a great opportunity for a young captain, I would tell you. Truly exercising mission command and representing our nation very well. I mean, frankly, it's pretty impressive. So, one, they're doing a great job, but it's a tough mission. It is a very challenging mission. It's tough to sustain. And I know General Hodges has expressed concerns about not having adequate aviation over there, and certainly the Army is looking at that, and there's been a request that's come up through the Joint Staff for additional aviation over there. Looking at the distances, the number of countries that they operate in, there's definitely a requirement. There's definitely a demand for increased Army aviation, and I think the rotational concept is a great concept for us to do that. It builds, builds proficiency in our force, and I think, that's the direction that we're headed, and look forward to going back and visiting more aviation over there in Europe.
Congressman Gibson, thanks for that question. For us, the European Reassurance Initiative does three main things. It funds the F-15C squadron at Lakenheath that have been planned to be brought home, and that's the EUCOM commander's only air-to-air resource and his only air-to-air training tool that he can use to train with our European allies and reassure them. It funds exercises and training for us to bring stateside units over to train with our European partners there. and then it funds some improvements to European airfields that let us bring those airplanes in there. So things like arresting gear, the runway and taxiway condition, and the things that make it possible for us to get in there. So it's a shot in the arm. It helps us do the things that we need to do in support of the EUCOM commander.
I agree with that assessment. Any concerns that you want to address on that right now as that's developing?
As regards our concern for our support to the EUCOM commander?
Yeah.
Well, you know, the EUCOM commander and his air assets are in a tough position because we use them to rotate and support requirements all over the world, and then he's got a growing requirement. So those units that we keep there rotate to do their share in the Middle East conflict, and when they're not there, they're the forces that you turn to do things like strike targets in Libya or do those things on short notice. So I'm sure he'd like to have more.
Yeah.
As we revisit that balance, the first step was to leave that F-15 squadron that we had actually planned to retire those assets, but we were able to keep them and keep them in the right place.
Okay.
For now.
Very well.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your comments. During these times of restrained and difficult budgets, your management skills are absolutely incredibly crucial, but also the information you provide us so that we can continue to advocate for those additional resources is incredibly important. Without your narrative and expertise, that advocacy would be certainly hampered. So thank you for your honesty and for your management skills. Thank you. We'll be adjourned.